Hello and welcome to 11FS FinTech Insider Spotlight. My name is David Brear, I'm the CEO here at 11FS. In this show, we shine a bit of a spotlight on the best and the brightest in the tech and financial services industry to get to know them a little bit more, their businesses, and really what they think the future of the industry will look like. On today's Spotlight, I am absolutely delighted to be joined by Ezechi Britton, who is the CEO of CFIT. That's the Centre for Finance and Innovation and Technology. Thank you for coming on the show. How are you doing?
It's a pleasure, and I'm doing well at the moment. You know, relaxing a little bit, managed to get a little bit of downtime over the summer after an insane first 4 months.
Well, and thankfully a little bit of sunshine in a little bit of summer as well, right? We're finally getting a little bit of it in London, but I'm sure it won't last. But so what we're going to be doing on today's show, we're going to be talking about what is CFIT, what does it do, and who is it for, as well as your goals for it, as well as your backgrounds, because you've had a really, really interesting career. Maybe if we start off with, though, I'm always a sucker for an acronym in terms of, I mean, CFIT, I mean, it sounds like sort of the next sort of fitness craze in that sense. But what is it and who is it for?
So CFIT, the Centre for Finance, Innovation and Technology. And I didn't come up with the name, right? That came out of the Khalifa Review. But fundamentally, we were a recommendation that came out of the Khalifa Review into UK fintech that was looking at what's the prize on offer for UK fintech and what are the barriers to achieving that. And we can talk about that in a bit, but the final recommendation was to launch a Centre for Finance and Innovation and Technology in the UK, which is CFIT. And CFIT's role is to unblock the barriers to financial innovation in the UK, mobilise the financial services ecosystem, and fundamentally make the UK the #1 destination for fintech startups and scale-ups globally. And we do that through our coalition model, which is a time-bound model. We bring together all the top stakeholders from across the financial services space, whether it's government, whether it's regulation, whether it's banks, credit bureaus, fintechs, tech companies. And then what we do is we bring them all together, we set a problem statement, we spend the next 6 to 9 months trying to really solve that, create tangible outputs and outcomes that unblock those barriers, move the fintech ecosystem forwards, and make the UK the #1 leader in financial innovation.
Amazing. I mean, that's a huge ambition, and as you say, the sort of building blocks to make that happen has been. I mean, that's no small feat, right? There's and I'd say, I mean, every geography is trying to do this, isn't there? But yeah, we'll come on to the sort of mechanics of actually how we're sort of going to make that happen, you know, here, and actually, I guess we've got the beautiful position of already got pretty good foundations with things that we've seen with, you know, open banking and the Project Innovate and all the different things that have happened here in the UK. But we'll come to that in a second. So talk to me a little bit more about your background then. I mean, I think I missed at the beginning that you've got an MBE, but actually, you know, that's an amazing heritage to bring to this. And also, I mean, I should say, you don't look like the typical, you know, Westminster, you know, you t-shirt and jeans. You know, you're kind of a different fit for this type of role for people. But I mean, is that accidental or is that on purpose?
I think that's very much on purpose, right? And I can wear a suit, right? It's just today, t-shirt and jeans, hot day. Come on.
I wasn't judging.
I mean, you got a hoodie on, man. So hoodie and shorts. I wish I'd worn those. I think that background is absolutely critical to this role, right? Because ultimately at CFIT, we're a private, not-for-profit industry body funded by government grant funding and the City of London. So we've got HM Treasury on one side and we've got the City of London on the other, who've both funded CFIT to the tune of £5.5 million for the next 3 years in order to achieve our mission. But we are really there to straddle that intersection. If you think about that Venn diagram, you've got government and policy, you've got regulation, you've got academia, and you've got industry. And we as an organisation are there to sit in the middle and bring all of those pieces together. So in order to lead an organisation like that, there's quite an eclectic mix of skills and backgrounds and experience that you need in order to facilitate all those moving parts. And
it would make a weird dinner party for sure, those different types of guests in it.
Absolutely would. And it's funny, I remember early conversations when I was brought into the process being told that there is no fit for this role. It's almost an impossible role to hire for. the funny thing is when I looked at the job spec and I looked at my background, I thought, actually, this is perfect for me because I don't tick any box naturally because of that eclectic background. And so if we look at everything that I've done, my parents were teachers, state school educated, failed my A-levels, had to resit them, went to the University of Canterbury and studied studied computer science, did a degree in that. But off the back of that, ended up joining Lehman Brothers as a software developer. So I was a coder from day one, programming in Java and the rest. And I've worked through Lehman in prime brokerage technology, interest rate derivatives, and credit derivatives, risk and pricing tech. Then from there, I went to Switzerland, spent some time out in Credit Suisse in equity derivatives, risk and pricing technology, came back to the UK, co-founded a fintech where I was one of the co-founders and CTO. And that fintech became one of the fastest growing fintechs in the UK. We went from startup to scale up. We raised something like £200 million, 100 million of which came from Goldman. We were their largest investment in fintech at the time. And that was an organization run by ethnic minorities, myself, Martin, and Monica. And unfortunately, we talk about all the great things that company did. We lent out something like 170 million to UK-based employees, starting from zero, right? And I built the core technology that powered a lot of that. But we ran into the very barriers that all the fintechs that we're here to support are hitting on a daily basis. So from personal experience, I know the barriers that the fintech sector faces. But then post Neighbour, I then launched very much a social enterprise called Code Untapped, which was about bringing together diverse technologists and placing them in enterprise organizations, but not through demo days, whatever, it was through hackathon days. And what we would do is we'd really get them to prove what they could do in the space with those organizations. So those organizations had to participate in the hackathon as well. You had to have senior managers actually coaching the teams. You had to have senior leadership actually judging the panels. So they really got to see what these people could do, not what they could talk about in interview or talk about in order to even get into the interview. So that whole idea of action over words has been very much ingrained into me from a very early time. And then whilst doing that, I was a founding member, principal and CTO in residence for ImpactX Capital, a venture capital fund investing in diverse and underrepresented entrepreneurs. And that was a fund that out of that first portfolio, we've already got our first unicorn, which was Marshmallow, which car insurance company run by Alex and Oliver, already valued at over $1 billion, right? So, and off the back of all of that, I ended up getting my MBE for services to diversity and young people, very kindly given to me by the Princess Royal herself, Princess Anne, which was an incredible experience over at Windsor Castle. But around that, I'm also a trustee for Crisis, the homeless charity. I've advised the water sector as well in various activities. So really innovation from every single angle. And I've worked with almost every stakeholder you can possibly imagine in order to get to that. And because of that really eclectic background and also that, the level of adversity I've had to overcome as well, I think there are a lot of traits that the recruitment team saw in me and the panel who recruited me saw in that background that really set the stage for the role going forwards.
Yeah.
And if you look at what we've done, it's all been about, there's one thread that really runs through all of that's execution.
Yeah.
Right. And I've been brought in to CFIT to set the pace, set the tone, and drive. And that's what we're doing.
Yeah. I mean, that's amazing. Touching on a few of those points, I mean, coming through an engineering background to then move forward. I mean, I've just said you're not the typical sort of, government body CEO. You're not the typical engineer either. Actually, yeah. when I sort of look at, our CTO at 11FS, Ewan, one of the most articulate people, but he's in a minority for that. Same with yourself, right? If you've got that dual power of communication and technological understanding, like the world's your oyster at that point, right?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, as technologists, we're all on a spectrum, right? We definitely are. And I think finding that combination between communication, technology, but also business minded as well, right? That commercial grounding is really quite difficult. And I think for me, that unique education that I've had going from investment banking to founding to VC has really brought all that together. But around that, I've been very fortunate to be involved in lots of things. I was in the church choir as a kid. I was in the Beavers, Cubs, Scouts. We were doing night hikes where you're leading the group at age 14, right? I was a martial artist. I did karate, Thai boxing, all sorts from 13 onwards. I've fought in the ring. I've coached university squads. I've done all of those different activities. It's funny when people always talk about Steve Jobs and the things he would do, and he would always talk about his calligraphy course that he did at university and how that inspired the first type fonts for Apple, which then set the stage for fonts going forwards. And his whole idea that you've got to be well-rounded, you've got to be experienced in multiple things. And I absolutely adhere to that. I think it's really important that you engage in activities outside of your core interest. And I've always done that. And I think that's really set me. I've been very fortunate to have done that.
Yeah. It's amazing how many, if you have those broad interests, it's amazing how much you can bring from one thing to another. I mean, I've always sort of said to people, I think people who have done sports to a certain level are probably better business people because of the level of focus that it brings about.
Yeah.
And actually the understanding of failure. Right?
Failure, exactly that. I'm really glad you mentioned that, because for me, failure isn't failure. Failure is a learning opportunity, right? I say always be learning, right? That's really important. They talk about fail upwards, fail forwards, blah, blah, blah. I mean, there are some connotations around that. But for me, failure is the ultimate weapon that we have, because it's the only way we get better.
Sure.
The thing about being naturally good at things, and there are many people who excel and have been born with great capability for certain activities, whatever, is that you don't actually know what it is that you've done that was successful. You just know, keep doing that thing, right? Until that stops working. And the problem is, you don't know why it was successful in the first place, so you don't know how to adjust and correct course. But when you've had failure in the past and you've had to overcome that, well, that didn't work because, what happened when that did work, and that probably worked because I did this, this, and this. So that ability to reflect is so important. And as humans, that's our superpower, the ability to have hindsight, look back, learn from it, and apply that forward. So that's why I say to everyone, don't be afraid of failure. It's a part of the learning process. Just try to make it as cheap and survivable as possible.
Yeah, they say if you're learning, you never lose, right? And then it's a good one to live by. I mean, something that's definitely not losing is getting an MBE. Like that's a huge one, and I mean that must have made your family really proud in terms of and yourself as well in terms of doing those things. But that must be quite an interesting sort of reflection point on your career when you get to that level. What that means, and actually from a point of representation as well in terms of being in a situation where you can show people there is a path in that way.
Oh, and I mean, it was such a proud moment to be there and to have my family there witnessing that as well. But for me, the moment that really sticks out in my mind the most was New Year's morning, because the announcement goes out 11:30 the night before on New Year's Eve. And a good friend of mine, a black man called Andrew Brown, I'll name him, calls me up at about literally 10:30 in the morning in tears, right? Because no one knows until it's announced. You're literally embargoed. You are not allowed to tell anybody. The only people who can know, press office and immediate family, right? That's it. Literally in tears saying, you don't understand how important this is. And in his words, man like us don't get things like this, right? And that was the moment when I realized how important it was to everyone around me. I felt validated. It was fantastic for me to feel a level of validation, especially as a technologist, of African heritage as well in the UK, to get that level of recognition for something I really cared about too, right? Not just business and this, that, and the other, but for actually helping people. That was incredible. But to see what it meant to the community that was powerful for me. And I often get asked the question, obviously some people turn their honours down for various reasons. How do you feel about that? And I always point back to that example, which is, it's not about me, it's about what it means for everybody else. And hopefully it gives me a platform that allows me to continue the great work and to continue supporting that community as we go forwards. And if I look at CFIT is not a company focused on underrepresented or anything like that. It is there for a very clear mission, which is to support the UK fintech sector. But even in that organisation, we can still drive an agenda forwards. My team is incredibly diverse. I've got a Polish woman up in Edinburgh on my team. I've got a white woman in Wales. My COO is an Indian man from Scotland. I've got my director of coalitions is a black man. I've got a black EA, female EA in the team. One of our analysts is a young black man. My chair is a white woman. And we do actually have a couple of white guys on the board as well, in the form of Alex and Stephen. But we've created an incredible, diverse team, and we're showing that we can execute, right? So again, it's that, let's show what we can do. There's a great axiom in writing, which is show, don't tell. And that's what we're all about.
Yeah, no, that makes a great deal of sense. And, that community point you're making there around, show the change that can be from a community perspective, both in terms of within financial services, but broader, I think lands, really loudly by, those things don't matter until it's all one-dimensional. Right. And at the point where it's one-dimensional, then actually it really matters. So, exactly. I can't imagine any of those people you've picked because of their ethnicity or background. They're because they're bloody awesome people at what they do. Exactly. And actually getting to that point where you've got that naturally is an amazing place to be. But I mean, I guess it sort of fits in a little bit with what you're doing with CFIT though, from a community perspective. Actually, back to that point around communication. You guys are kind of sitting there a little bit sort of almost Rosetta Stoney. You're trying to be able to translate into government and translate into regulators, but actually you've got the credibility to talk to startups, not in the sort of dad at the disco sense, and it's like, well, this is a good beat. It's like, no, you've been there and you've done this stuff. So that sort of empathy, to your point earlier on around you've been through these trials and the tribulations of building businesses, it's not easy, is it? No. So how much do you sort of find that sort of center point communication capability and that community purpose within what you're doing, that really has to shine through on a day-to-day basis? Yeah,
and I think that's where my experience really comes to the foreground, right? Is that ability to speak to all of those stakeholders in whatever language we need to use. Do I need to speak to government? Do I need to speak to the regulator? Do I need to speak to the CEO of a bank? Do I need to speak to the CEO of a startup? Do I need to speak to your technology lead? Do I need to have a conversation with your head of innovation? Do I need to speak to your scrum master, right? Do I need to speak to one of your VCs or your LPs? I can have that conversation with every single one of them. Is it a trustee conversation? Okay, well, let's have that. Is it a NED conversation? Great, we'll have that conversation too. And to be able to, I love that Rosetta Stone analogy, but to be able to sit there and be that convening translation force as well is really valuable. And that's why so many organizations have signed up to this coalition. We've got over 40 organisations participating in this at different levels, whether it's at that kind of more partner level, supporting the coalition through resources and guidance and advice, or whether it's at working group level, really putting your shoulder to the wheel and delivering. We can have that conversation at every level with every one of those companies. And what's brilliant for them is that we can bring the FCA into that. That they are supporting us with advice, guidance, their tech sprints, their sandboxes as well. We speak with them on a regular basis, whether it's talking to Treasury, DCIT, DBT about what their activities are, what they're doing, and how does that align with what we're doing at CFIT, but also being able to feed that back into the likes of Andrew Griffith, Kevin Hollenrake, and the rest, Jeremy Hunt and everybody. This is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, this is how we're doing it. Same with the City of London. And really bringing that all together in a way that's coherent, understandable, has the vision, but also has the technical underpinnings to mean this is what we're going to do, and then demonstrate that we're actually doing it. I think that's really valuable.
Yeah. I know one thing, big on the agenda with CFIT as well is, I'd say the fintech revolution sort of happened a little bit within the M25 to start with, right? And obviously, there was the sort of jokes about, what's the best way to advertise your fintech is like, well, probably a poster in Shoreditch, it's like, because that was where most people were sort of gravitating to in that way. But to all of the things you were just saying a second ago, I mean, whether it's Cardiff or Manchester or Edinburgh or wherever, there's fintechs growing all over the UK, right?
Absolutely. And I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because something I try to talk about whenever we talk about CFIT, and it's really important that we cover this, is that UK-wide focus. Right? Even though we're backed by the City of London, we have a mandate to be UK-wide. We are a virtual organisation. We don't have a HQ. Right? We have co-working spaces around the country where we might spend some time and the rest getting involved with the community, a desk we can sit down at, and that's across the country. But we don't have a HQ, we're across the country. We launched in Leeds, for example, and we did that especially for this reason, to again show our commitment to the regions. We work very closely with all the regional bodies, whether it's FinTech West, whether it's Supertech, whether it's FinTech Wales, FinTech North, FinTech Scotland, FinTech Northern Ireland, Innovate Finance. They are very, very closely involved and intimately involved with the working groups that we're driving and we're doing at the moment. And there's a strong desire for us to build those working groups around those regions so that we can deliver regional solutions as well and showcase regional excellence and really get involved with those core cities around some of those developments as we go forwards. And that then starts to play into the academic piece, which we don't talk that often about, but part of our mandate is to be research-led, but also to bridge that talent pipeline issue between academia and the fintechs and really start to create that pipeline and plug that gap. We're not here to be a recruitment team, we're not here to be a jobs billboard, but we are here to help go, you know what, we've mapped the entire ecosystem. We are working with all these great companies in our coalition. We're working with all these great universities. Did you know that University of East London has a master's program for fintech, for example, for mature students? Oh, no, we didn't. Well, you should go and talk, right? And start to bring all of that together, working with Karen Elliott and the rest at the UK Fin Plus network, plugging that gap between funding and fintech research, which is something that we haven't really seen before. And that they're doing fantastic work, but being able to bring that all together with what we're doing and shine a light on it is really important. And that's a key part of what we are here to do, which is to be a mobilizing force for the fintech ecosystem. Yeah. To date, we've had these incredible cluster groups that are brilliant at understanding, representing, supporting their members and bringing their problems forwards. We've had Innovate Finance. It's been fantastic at being a voice for fintech, whether it's nationally or globally, and really presenting that case on a global scale and to government. What we haven't had is a body that can help go, all right, well, let's solve some of these actual problems and give you guys something to shout about, right? And that's what we're here to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it? And I guess, you touched a little bit earlier on around the origin of this comes from the Khalifa Report. I mean, we've had Ron on previously to sort of talk about, Ron and Charlotte, actually, your chairwoman, to talk more about, well, the origins of that. I mean, we sort of jokingly sort of refer to it like the difficult second album for the UK because, the UK created such a leading position when it came to fintech. And to your point, actually, that was a tapestry of different factors, wasn't it? It wasn't just crazy amounts of funding like Silicon Valley. It was, talent and technology and, problems and regulation and all these things. I mean, do you sort of see the investment in CFIT as almost the UK's almost challenge to itself to try and extend that leadership position, maintain that leadership position, not just for us, but actually for a global stage? Because, pretty much every country, every regulator, anywhere you go has tried to sort of reiterate and sort of almost copy some of the things that we've seen here. How much that must be a lot of pressure because you're like there's a lot of people expecting us to keep smashing out these hits every week, but how much does that sort of play into the feeling on that side of things? There's a excitement, but also there's a sort of an element of anticipation as well.
Oh, I love that question. And that excitement and fear, I think, if you don't feel a dose of fear, you're not living, right? You're not trying hard enough. If everything's easy, well, you really need to push a little bit harder. In terms of our position, let's be clear, UK is number 2 globally in terms of fintech, right?
Yeah.
We're number 2. We're number 2 behind the US. And when I say number 2 in terms of investment dollars,
yeah.
right? However, we are number 1 ahead of the next 14 countries in Europe combined in terms of fintech investment. And that is a huge step forwards. We talk about exports, we talk about growth industries. Fintech should be the UK's top growth export, right? It absolutely should be. There are very few industries where we can say we are in the top 3 globally, right? And fintech, we're number 2, but I think we should be number 1. For all the reasons that you said, why we have the talent, we have the skills, we have the understanding, we have the knowledge. We have lacked maybe some of the other pieces that we need, whether it's funding, whether it was connectivity, whether it was talent, in terms of bringing those people up and in. Because all that talent existed in the banks. All the best developers were in the banks in the UK. Because if you wanted to get paid as a software developer in the UK, you joined a bank. In the US, you went to Silicon Valley, right? But that made a huge difference. That meant all of our top tech talent was in the UK banking system. So when we had the financial crisis and the rest, and people were looking for new opportunities, that naturally created an off-ramp to the fintech industry that was created in the UK, naturally. Now, we need to support that, take it forward, and make sure that we are number 1, because we should be. And if we look at what's happening with open finance and the rest of it, we led the world on open banking. And now the rest of the world is looking at those open banking APIs and going, right, how do we take that and how do we take it forwards? How do we leapfrog over that and create digitally driven, API-driven, data-driven financial ecosystems that allow us to create real-time settlements, et cetera, going forwards? So it's really important for us to go, not only we should be number 1, but we should also be leading the world on that initiative, right? Because we created the basis for all of this. We have the skills and the expertise. We should be setting the roadmap and the template for that going forwards. So I think there is absolutely a zeitgeist at the moment, and it's brilliant to see, we touched on it earlier, the second recommendation coming out of the Khalifa Review, which is the FinTech Growth Fund, right? So we now have all of these bodies all moving at pace, all executing. We've got organizations around the world looking at us saying, we want to do this too. So I think it's beholden on us to take advantage of that position and extend that leadership and take that number 1 spot and drive that forwards. And is that pressure? Yeah. Is that scary? Absolutely. I'm not even going to pretend.
Well, it's interesting. That point you make around the, as you say, the Khalifa report gave a number of different recommendations. We're in that weird, we're in like the first 15 minutes of an Avengers movie right now, right? It's like, okay, we're standing up all of these things, and then, the big boss is this. So like, and how do we solve for, inclusivity? How do we solve for, various different sort of failings that we've got within the current system? How much do you get, brought into, I know with, Andrew Bailey at the Bank of England, and previously when Chris Woolard was at the FCA, there's a lot of sort of financial tourists to a certain degree.
Right.
I don't mean offshore accounts. I mean HKMA were always fascinated by what the FCA are doing, or Monetary Authority of Singapore. I know a lot of people have been looking to the UK for, okay, what's next? What's that next thing that we're doing? You must talk internationally quite a lot, I would have thought, to go, hey, this is the blueprint that we're following. This is the plan, and this is how all of these things interconnect to make the big picture.
So we work very closely with government and a number of those bodies as we talk about what is that future roadmap for the UK. How does that impact on an international position? I have to be careful what I say in regards to some of this at the moment, but very much so, we are very involved in a number of those key conversations. And all I can say is watch the space, right? There's some really exciting things that we're talking about, looking at as we go forwards.
Yeah. Well, and like you say, that that coalition mentality of actually pulling, disparate parties with disparate agendas and objectives, that works in a country, but it works amazingly well globally, right?
Absolutely. And there's things to learn globally as well. You mentioned Singapore. There's also Brazil. There's the UAE. There's the Saudis. There's Israel. Even things like Nigeria and their central bank digital currencies, right? There's so many different initiatives taking place on an international scale that we can also look at and go, what can we learn from what's being done here? And how do we use that to reinforce what we're doing right now so that we can stretch out that lead? So it is absolutely critical that we are having those conversations as we go forwards, because ultimately we're here to enable the UK fintech sector to scale, right? So we have to look at how other people are doing it as well.
Definitely. Yeah, keep learning, right? As we said earlier on. I mean, it's an interesting time for the industry more broadly as well. I mean, a lot of, obviously with the ups and downs, and we've seen, the Credit Suisse and Silicon Valley Bank and, sort of trials and, tribulations of the industry, whether it is fintech startups finding it a little bit harder to get funding, or the big banks finding it a little bit harder to sort of find their purpose in this period. I mean, the industry's in quite an interesting flex, but definitely there's so many slices of opportunity still to come, right? I guess how do you view the future of the industry in that sense? Because we sort of talk internally. There's sort of analog products, and actually there's this digital sort of future of what that brings to it, and it feels like we're really sort of scratching the surface on that potential.
Well, I love that you mentioned that, and let's be clear, there's still a lot of dry powder out there as well. I mean, investment is down, but still way up on a few years ago, right? So there's a lot of investment cash still waiting to come in. But that piece around the future, I've often talked about this in the past, about historically, UK fintechs have been very, very good at finding key verticals, very thin verticals off of existing businesses, existing banks that were either underserved or weren't particularly profitable for those banks, or just weren't well catered for, and going, we're going to be laser focused on that. Ultimately, we're going to build a business out of a narrow sliver of your existing client base. I almost call it fintech with a lowercase t, all right? Finance organizations empowered by technology. In the US, what they've historically been very good at is building whole new platforms that create whole new demographics of customers and whole new revenue streams. And where I think we need to see ourselves going forwards is starting to see more fintechs and uppercase T, where technology is really the enabler, it's driving the change, it's building those new customer cohorts. But part of the problem that we've seen in the past with that is that most fintechs, as it stands, are only able to solve within a very specific lane. Most businesses are, the regulators are, government is, and that has been because there's been this lack of communication and connectivity and enablement. And that's why I believe CFIT is in such an important position right now, because by bringing all those players together, it enables us to actually solve for some of these bigger issues that then allow for new innovations to come out that create new products that empower new consumers, create new cohorts, which create new categories of fintech, which generate new revenue lines, which creates new scale-up revenue, which creates new investment opportunities. And that's the pathway that we're on today. And whether that is creating, smart contract-based companies, whether it's crypto, whatever that might be, I'm not saying crypto is the answer, I'm just giving that as an example. That's the world we're starting to enter in now, where I think the word fintech is going to start to fade away in many ways. Everyone's a fintech. Right? That's been a big challenge. How do you define a fintech? Everyone incorporates some form of accounting or payments technology into their product today. So what really is a fintech? And for me, it's that embedded fintech piece, fintech as a service. It starts to get more interesting as we start to see whole new cohorts being created, but we have to bridge those gaps.
It's interesting, isn't it? We often talk to big bank executives about really what that future looks like. It's like, okay, describe it to me in a way where I can put all of the pieces that I have back together again and have a different outcome. And the reality is different to that, really, isn't it? It's not okay, and what combination does my savings products, my lending products, and my current accounts be the answer? It's that actually the future is almost a return to traditional values, really. You know, we've gone from services to self-service, and actually the next thing really is not, hey, we get a list of things and we get to pick. It's fundamentally, how do you help people be better off? And I think back to all of the points that you've made around serving communities, or, from an inclusivity perspective, that's inclusivity of all types, because financial services is really complex. And actually, the more we can serve people in that regard, the better the outcomes are going to be for everybody. And ultimately, it's why we do this stuff, right? It's that's the fun bit, is you get to solve problems for millions of people, don't you?
Well, I love that you mentioned that, because when we started out with the research that we did around what coalition should we start with, right? What problem should we aim to solve? And we really canvassed the ecosystem. We did roadshows, virtual talks. I was all over the country, all sorts. And what came over overwhelmingly was a desire to focus on consumer financial awareness in some way, shape. Now, that's a very broad concept, right? But ultimately, it's about empowering consumers. And when we looked at that, and we looked at open finance, it was very much, there's a wealth of information that is currently siloed and locked away that would enable some of these outcomes. If we can unlock some of those data sets, standardize some of those APIs, prove what you can do when you make that information available and generate new outcomes, that then enables people to make more informed decisions. And it's not about allowing your average person to go and invest in some complex derivative product. It's about allowing your average person to unlock that collective 1.5 trillion that is sat in people's bank accounts, not doing anything, right? And it's sat there because people are afraid to make decisions with their money, because they don't know what is available to them. They don't know what their financial position is. They're worried about that rainy day. And so we have something like 1.5 trillion inactive in consumer accounts, an equivalent amount in SME accounts for very similar reasons. That's over £3 trillion sat inactive in UK bank accounts today, because people don't understand their financial position and don't understand what's coming next and don't understand what products are available to them. 3 trillion, that's almost the equivalent to the UK pension funds industry, right? That is a huge amount of money. Now, if we could unlock that, we talk about scale-up capital, I tell you now.
That solves a lot of problems.
It solves a lot of problems, right?
And how much of that do you see? I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because you liken it to other industries. I mean, the challenge within financial services is people don't know what good looks like. And in fact, they don't really know what bad looks like either, in that sense. But in the broad sense, it's why people start drinking water with maple syrup in it, because they know Beyonce did it and she got this outcome. It's why Martin Lewis is so successful, because in a sea of no advice, or advice only being reserved for people who can pay for it, that actually people are kind of a little bit rudderless when it comes to kind of orchestrating their financial lives. So it's fascinating to see where that goes. But as you say, I mean, that the mobilization of that and the move away from just sort of commoditization of financial instruments to services that really serve people. I mean, that's a really exciting future, really.
Absolutely. And not to plug them, but it's great to have the FCA so involved in what we're doing, because that's something they're very interested in, especially if you look at what they've with the new consumer duty that's come out. And it's all about making sure you give products, or you offer products that are appropriate to your customers. But that's great. But how do you know whether this product is appropriate? And how does the consumer know whether this product is appropriate? It creates some really interesting tensions right there. So again, it's about unlocking that information and not just giving people a sea of data, but making sure you're giving them access to relevant information that informs them and enables them to make a decision that is relevant to them. And that's the key thing, I think. We look at, it's funny, how many times have you looked at a loan or an SM or a mortgage or whatever, and you see an illustration and you go, yeah, but that does not look anything like my current situation. I don't understand it. Doesn't mean anything to me. That's simply because of a lack of personalized data. If we could plug into your financials and go, okay, this is where, you know, you've got pension funding, this is where you've got maybe some ISA savings, this is where you've got some equities saved up, this is where you've got some cash in this bank account, that bank account. Oh, and these are some of your obligations that are out there. Actually, this is the most appropriate thing for you, and this is why.
Yeah.
What would that do? Right? All of a sudden, you can make an informed decision. You don't have to understand it all, but you can go, well, okay, that now makes sense to me. I will or won't do that. And that's your choice. Whereas at the moment, it's people are paralyzed by indecision because of fear. And that fear is completely valid given the situation with cost of living and the rest of it. So how can we solve for that? And by doing that, we unblock all these other barriers to growth.
Yeah. I mean, I think I probably know the answer to this, but sort of what's next for CFIT then? I mean, I get the sense, the reason I say I think I know the answer is you have got an engineering mindset, right? The backlog is reasonably infinite in this sense. The opportunities are, you know, reasonably limitless as well in terms of what you can do. So I guess there's a corporate structure, but really the things you're doing will continually evolve and continually shape as the industry changes as well.
No, absolutely. So I mean, at the moment, this first coalition is around open finance. We're very much looking to set that roadmap for open finance going forwards, in support of JROC and OBE and everything else that's happening today. We do participate in the Smart Data Council as well, and we're looking very much at how do we support that as we go forwards. But it's what comes next. For me, the coalition itself is one thing, but then what's the off-ramp from that? What are the recommendations we make? What are the actual products that come out of that? What are the outcomes that we drive? How do we enable government and industry to take those things forwards? And then what does Coalition 2 look like? What does Coalition 3 look like? And how do we create an organisation that supports that going forward to continue to support that growth of the UK fintech sector to make us number one globally? And how do we then empower our regions as we're doing that to enable all of our companies to not just be national champions, but global champions?
Fantastic. Well, we super appreciate you making the time to come and hang out and tell us what you're up to. You definitely have to keep coming back, and as things progress and as the coalitions progress, then love to kind of hear more as that goes through. But thank you so much for joining us. Where can people learn a little bit more about, I mean, you and your background and all the good work that you guys are doing at CFIT?
So you can find us at cfit.org.uk, with our website, plenty of information about the coalitions and all the activities that we're driving. You can also find us on LinkedIn and Twitter, and I am very easy to find. So just do a Google search for me and reach out.
Fantastic. Right, that's all we have time for this week. Make sure you follow 11FS on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram to stay up to date with all of the cool stuff that we're doing. And if you enjoy the show, make sure you subscribe to the 11FS YouTube channel, where you can also catch up on all of the previous episodes. Have a great week. Goodbye.